Hello, and welcome to the Future Shapers podcast, brought to you by the Spaceship Academy. My name is Tod Gimbel. I'm your host. I'm one of the co-founders of the Spaceship Academy. We are a sustainability education startup, and our website is www.thespaceship.AI. And this is our podcast. And on our podcast, we like to bring you people of great interest, of great experience, and of great knowledge on various subjects. At the Spaceship, we have a group of experts, about 20 right now, that we call Spaceship Fellows. And those fellows are subject matter experts in some area of sustainability. And today, I'm extremely excited to have one of our fellows, one of the early sign-ons as a fellow to the Spaceship, Dr. Willy LeGrand. Willy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Todd, for this intro. Welcome as well. From my side, it's a pleasure to share some quality time here with you.
I know, we've talked many times. We met briefly in New York last year, so we've actually seen each other live and in the flesh, and hopefully our paths will cross live again. It's been kind of fun here at the Spaceship because of the 20 fellows. There are people are all over the world, and I haven't even met all of you live. You I got to meet live, but certainly too short a time. Listen, let's start out by having you just kind of introduce yourself, who you are, where you're at, what you do, and kind of how you came to know us.
Yeah, you bet. So as you mentioned, my name is Willy LeGrand. I'm a professor at a university in Germany. It's called IU International University of Applied Sciences. It's one of the largest state-recognized university here in Germany. I also hold lectures as a visiting professor in France and Spain and in the US, in fact. So my field is sustainability and business management, but my focus is really on one particular sector, which is the tourism and hospitality sectors, actually. Yeah, my background, maybe just a little bit of info. My background, so I was born in France, but I actually grew up on a dairy farm in Canada.
Wow.
Yeah, and I went to study geography, and that was in Canada. I continued with an MBA with a specialization in corporate environmental management in the Netherlands, and before moving on with my PhD in the UK. But it's really the hospitality industry that gave me a home ultimately. And it was a bit this desire to combine my interest. As I said, I come a little bit from that geography and environmental aspect. So combining that interest and knowledge on the functioning of environment with the hospitality sector that I wanted to do. And I found sort of my passion in the world of education, in fact, where I could explore sort of a bit the cause and effect and solutions regarding sustainable tourism and hospitality. So I've been in education for over 2 decades now.
Oh, that's awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing, and I think what's amazing about it is simply being around a lot of very bright minds, young people with lots of creativity, lots of ideas, lots of fears as well, but lots of hope at the same time. I guess that's in a way sort of that keeps me young myself. I'm not sure, but yeah, I always go back to this thing. Sort of, there's an author that his name is Roman Kasnarek, and he wrote a book on how to be a good ancestor. Actually, everything that we know today and is sort of this accumulation of thousands of years of practice and debates and research science. So we really, I think our generation or any generation before us, we stand on shoulders of giants, really. And the question is, what are we going to do with it? What do we do with this knowledge, and what do we do with all this accumulated knowledge for the next generation? And that's where the work comes in, because sustainability in hospitality, tourism, doesn't really matter actually which field, but it's about that. It's about, taking responsibility for the good and the bad currently going on, and what do we do with this? So I play only a very small role here, but my role revolves around one particular sector, and it's tourism and hospitality sector. And I guess I'm pretty, how do you say, cherished is not the right word. I'm pretty lucky, I guess, because that sector of tourism hospitality is a pretty amazing sector for many ways. It's a very positive sector as an industry. And, since we deal with the basics of food and beverage and social interaction and shelter, right? The basic of life, really. It's a good place to discuss sustainability, in fact.
Well, that is fascinating. And you have your life experience is so vast as far as where you've been. You've been urban, you've been rural, you've been North America, you've been Europe. That gives you probably some great personal understanding, because you've been to a lot of different places and a lot of different situations, to really kind of make you, besides the academics, just personally rounded in understanding the planet and understanding sustainability, especially when it comes to hospitality. I will just say, I grew up in Wisconsin, which is almost Canada. And while I didn't grow up on a dairy farm, living in Milwaukee, it was like a 5-minute drive to dairy farms.
That's right. Yeah, very agricultural. That's right.
I've seen many dairy farms, and then I've also been to Europe and the areas where you've spent time studying and teaching. And there's a big difference, and the world is a big place, and sustainability is a huge topic. And to zone in on sustainable hospitality, I think, is super important because it touches on all aspects of sustainability because of the movement of people to here and to there and the footprint that they leave. Tell us a little bit about the travel and hospitality industry, just like a snapshot, because it's huge, I have to assume, and it's not
Yeah,
just hotels, it's like a lot of
it
different
is,
things.
well, right, exactly. So hotel is a very, very small aspect of it, really. But I mean, I think the hotel is just to put a quick bracket around hotels. I think it's quite interesting because hotel, I think, is that it provides a social contract between people. You've got a guest and a host. You could argue we're all guests on this planet anyways, so we just inherit the planet and we just try to be steward for a little bit of time for the next generation, so we're also guests here. But the hotel sector is quite interesting because it has that social contract between a guest and a host, and this is, in this day and age, I mean, it's very positive, and we need that. We need to be able to accept other people's differences and value the differences, and it's rich, and the hospitality industry is a rich industry. So anyways, but yeah, so the hotel sector is very small, but you're quite right to say, we often say, 1 out of 10 jobs on this planet has to do with tourism in some way and another. And because we're looking at, if you look at the entire value chain of tourism, I mean, we have from the food production, so from the farmer, in fact, right, all the way to a hotel and a restaurant where I serve the stuff, all the way to the distribution. If stuff needs to be shipped to your home, if I want to deliver a meal, the transport of tourism, of tourists, of course, across destination. I mean, we're talking about a massive, massive industry in terms of economic impact, for sure, in terms of employment, for sure, and in goods and services. So with this economic impact comes, of course, a fairly large environmental and social impact. I mean, we employ a lot of people, we provide, livelihood, and these people pay taxes, and so I mean, there's a whole economic system of direct, indirect impact here, but also from, as I said, from the environmental aspect. And it's interesting because traditionally we've always thought, when I studied geography and I was looking, and I decided to, as I said, hospitality is the sector that gave me a home, really. We were looking at the hospitality sector and thinking, well, I mean, it's not very much of an extractive sector. We often thought that, like tourism, same thing. You go to visit a mountain, but you don't extract the mountains. I mean, you don't pull the minerals out of the mountain when you're a tourist. You simply go and you take some pictures and you leave. And so that non-extractive component, we always thought, well, this is then a very light light foot industry. We don't have so much of an impact simply because we don't build anything. I mean, it's not quite true, because of course we build airplanes and we build hotels, and we need those resources. But originally we thought, oh, this is not a very, very big impact industry. But we've come to realize that actually it isn't this way. It is as extractive in many ways as many other industries, simply because it relies on an infrastructure. We need an infrastructure to have people traveling around, unless of course you want to take your hiking boots and walk out of your house and just simply hike your way around, and so and go from one village to the next. But most people don't do that, right? So you'll take your car, you'll take the train, you'll take the plane. And transport, of course, is half of the footprint, at least on a carbon footprint of tourism, and then accommodation sector the other half. And that's not even counting, sort of, as I said, all the resources that goes into building hotels and so on. I mean, we have, if I look at the current pipeline of the number of hotels that are being planned for the next 24 months, I mean, we're talking about, thousands and thousands of properties. And so, we do have an impact. And this is where, as I said, we, as an industry, I think there's this idea of being steward, right? You can be steward for a planet, you can be, and the social contract, I think, is very important these days between peoples that don't know each other. I think this is the creation of a positive social contract. I think hospitality plays a role here, tourism plays a role, and we need this. So we have much more of much more than just a business role in tourism. We have a societal role. We have an environmental role in being guardians and stewards and facilitator of community resilience. There's many roles we need. There's many hats we wear actually in this industry.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because my background in public affairs and corporate affairs, I did a lot of work on, stakeholders and stakeholder engagement. And if you look at hospitality, you just mentioned it, there's tons of stakeholders. It's not just the owners of hotels, it's not just the travelers themselves, it's the people building the transportation modes, it's the companies that run them, it's hotels, it's restaurants, it's all that stuff. And when you talk about not being extractive, the person who goes to take a picture of a beautiful mountain is not digging a hole and taking out the minerals, but they're leaving a footprint to get to where that mountain is. They have trash because they're eating and doing all the things humans do in a different place that is affecting that place in a way that maybe it not be as dramatic as digging a hole and taking the minerals out, but you're still leaving a footprint. And
Yeah,
all the different stakeholders have a different angle on that, on how to look at that and how to deal with it.
for sure. And I mean, you're talking about sort of, being a tourist. And I mean, we know of destinations that are suffer from having perhaps too many tourists or badly managed tourists and so on. In a way, I'm sort of thinking that in a curriculum these days, and this is a very far-fetched idea, but there is one thing that many people will be on this planet all at the same time is at one point in their life they will be a tourists. Do you see what I mean? Like when we go study, some people will study engineering and other people will study politics and other people will study history and whatever, and they'll become that. I'm never going to be an engineer and I'm never going to be an historian, but what we have in common is we're all going to be tourists at some point. So that's the commonality we have. And the question is, do we know what it's like to be a good tourist? We often turn the other way around and we say, well, how good are you as a hotel, or how good are you as a destination? It's like from the supply side, how do you manage your impact? And this is very important. Don't get me wrong, but if we turn the lens just for a minute and we look at the tourists themselves, do we know really what it's like? I mean, you could argue, okay, maybe it's common sense to be a good tourist, but I would argue maybe we need training. Do you know, maybe because all of us are at some point a tourist. So how do we deal with being in communities we don't know? How do we interact? How, what is the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? And I would argue there's not enough courses on this. The engineering students should be, they should be taking a tourism class and perhaps the historian as well, and so on, right? That would be the argument you could make because
Because
all of
you're
us are going to be
absolutely
tourists at
right.
some point.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, even whether you're rich or whether you're poor. I mean, even people who maybe can't afford to, go to Paris from the U.S., they're still going nearby. They may go camping. They may just go to a restaurant. They may do a staycation somewhere nearby. So you're right. Everybody is a tourist at some point. And I, as a both tourist and longtime business traveler, which is another group of stakeholders because they're still taking advantage of the whole hospitality industry as business travelers and doing it probably as frequently or maybe not as much as social tourists, but it's still a big sector. And I'm thinking like historically, because I've been doing this for so many years, how I approach travel compared to back in the day when I was starting out in the 90s, where you'd go to the hotel and you'd use 5 towels, you'd drop them on the floor. You didn't really care or think about, because you weren't at home. Like when you're at home, you think differently about how you deal with your laundry and this and that and your waste. But when you're on the road, it's kind of like, well, I'm traveling, so I can be totally, I don't have to care about anything because this isn't my place. How has, tell me a little bit about how things have trended or changed over time from those days where I'm sure there's still people who are that way, but has that has that changed? Have tourists and travelers' attitudes and actions changed over time?
I think, I mean, yes and no, I guess you could say. There is, it's a dance between the supply side and the demand side in many ways, right? You have the hotels that have put new standard operating procedures, and some are, more ahead of the game than the others, and they set the pace. And, you go back a few years ago and you had all the little mini plastic shampoos and so on, that's gone, and now you have dispensers. But some hotels were reluctant because they thought, oh, the guests are not going to accept this, and so on. So it's a dance between, how much do you want to shake things up, what is the willingness to accept from the consumers on them, on their side. You've of course, as we said, now you've got more and more tourists, and the tourists have become, very knowledgeable in many ways. I mean, we have access to information like we've never had before. I mean, I used to run a hotel with my wife, and I used to work in hotels in the 1990s. I mean, it was barely internet. So, we didn't, it's not like we didn't care about a bad review, but the reviews didn't mean very much in those days. You'd ask your customers right there at the front desk how their stay was, but that basically, that information stayed there. Things are very different these days. So consumers, travelers are knowledgeable about travel. They know what's good and what's not good. They are also very knowledgeable, increasingly knowledgeable about what's good and what's not good on sustainability as well. I mean, and they happily say, if they see things they see discrepancies, they will voice it. And so you deal with a much more knowledgeable consumer base. But as you've just said, now you've got very many different segments of travelers. I mean, you've mentioned the business, and even within the business, you've got different segments, and the leisure, same things, and the social guests and the groups. And so there's very, very many, and they all in some ways behave slightly different in their booking, in what they're looking for, in their expectations, in what they need from a hotel room, or from their stay, or from their trip. But one thing is for sure, as I said, they will be much quicker to pinpoint to greenwashing, for example. So I mean, if hotels are just doing a lot of talking and not much walking, I think now the consumers won't get fooled, and that's okay. I think this is good. Those that are not doing their work properly should be called out. So as I said, I think the travelers, the tourists, are just simply more knowledgeable. They're more mature in some ways in traveling. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always a good tourist. This is what I said before, right? I still think that we need to have some kind of tourist education. There are some destinations that make people sign a pledge before they come to visit. You pledge to respect the cultural heritage of the place. You pledge to not litter XYZ. You sign the pledge, and then you come to visit us. So the reason why we have pledges like this is obviously because not everybody behaves the way they should be doing. And I'm also referring this a little bit to, if you have friends coming to your home, it's like that. I mean, you're not going to your friend's place and trashing the place. Do you know what I mean? There's a certain understanding, and it's an unwritten contract between you and your friends at their place on how to behave. We don't have to write it down, because we understand that, we're going to respect the boundaries and whatever. So it's the same, really. I mean, when you visit the destinations as a tourist, there is that unwritten contract. Signing a pledge is making, basically, it's
That's, well, I
putting
mean,
it
that's the
on.
next step.
It's
That's a
that next step, and the reason why
yeah.
we do so is because there's too many abuses. But I would imagine that if everybody is respectful in the way that we travel, we wouldn't have to have that, because that contract would be alive and well. Maybe just to point out, there's a couple of very good books about this. There's a book that actually traces, I don't know, 4,000 years of a hospitality history, and it goes back to to the Roman times, and to the medieval times, and the religion and so on, and about the meaning of providing hospitality. And it's kind of interesting to read that. It's interesting to see how much of that unwritten contract, how much that plays a role in being a guest and a host. And I think maybe today we're very transactional in what we do, right? I mean, there's money on the table, and it's a transaction. I give you so much, I expect so much. But with that transaction, that doesn't mean that we take away the social contract out of it. Sometimes we just focus so much on that transaction that we think we're allowed anything because we've got that
Yeah,
transaction.
that's, I was just going to say, you remind me of, hey, I'm paying $300 a night for this beautiful room. I can use 20 towels if I want to. I can, all the things that you probably wouldn't do at your own home or at a friend's home because they're your friend and you're not going to like trash their bathroom when you use it. But when you're somewhere else where you believe you're paying for something, you are probably prone to be a little less sensitive to everything around you because it's not your usual routine either. So I assume that it's hard to break people out of that.
Yeah. This is why I sort of I've come around to this crazy idea to say, well, we should have tourism classes throughout all
How to
fields.
be a good
I'm
tourist.
probably not going to go anywhere with this idea, but but anyways, here we go.
Well, but interestingly enough, and we'll get to this, you and I know this, but this AI and prepping for a trip, there are some things that can be done. I think that's where
Exactly.
we want to take this conversation. But before we get there, I want to dig a little bit more into, we've talked about the different stakeholders in the hospitality industry, and we've kind of focused a little bit on the travelers and the tourists, which obviously most people will be most familiar with because there are more people who are tourists than there are, hotel owners or restaurant owners or airline owners. So what is the impetus for the non tourists, for the rest of the industry to kind of take actions in sustainable and regenerative travel? I mean, what is their motivation? Is it only because people are asking for it, or are there other motivations? Is there a monetary motivation for them? What makes these stakeholders care and want to take action?
Yeah. So I've done this is a great question. I've done that research. I've done almost over 20 years ago. One of my very first research here in Germany in 2003 was about that. Was about the motivators and barriers towards sustainability actions of independent hoteliers. I've repeated that research another one more time, I think about 10 years ago. Things hadn't changed, and I don't think it's changed very much these days either. There's a little bit of a continuum of motivation, if you will, from very extrinsic to very intrinsic, but the bulk of them are perhaps in the middle. At the end of the day, I mean, it's for the large players, a lot of it will be about risk. I mean, sustainability is a question of risk management, a lot of it, risk to their assets, risk to their operations, because we're looking at extreme weather pattern or whatever it is. So a lot of it has got to do with risk management. It has to do a lot with finance, with acquiring the finance. That is, I have to provide the data, transparency of data on my performance on various pillars of sustainability to be able to acquire the funds because these investors are interested to know that I know my risk and I can manage those. So there is this whole aspect. But then if you're asking sort of more the more independent operators and owners, the smaller properties, a lot of it will be still financial motivators. So I mean, a lot of it is still, oh, if I'll be energy efficient. I mean, the byproduct is that you're being more sustainable, but that's not really the motivation. The motivation is energy efficiency because it's a cost saving factor. And a lot of it is still that it could be driven by also partly having a good image. Okay, you might attract some consumers that are interested in this, although here again it's very problematic. Still all of this in terms of how do you attract, how much material do these consumers need to know about your property for them to be interested in coming. There's many other factors that play a role when you choose a destination, as choose a property, beside environmental or sustainability issues. So, in that, and then you have the intrinsic side. So you do have some entrepreneurs that they're at the cutting edge of sustainability stuff simply because that's who they are. They're just motivated, they're innovators, and they're way out there, and they think about the building and the way they're going to build it, and it's going to be low impact, etc. They've got a holistic approach simply because they are motivated individuals. But I would say that the bulk of them is you've got to have some kind of business case for any of these decision, and it makes sense because those people are running businesses. I mean, it's their livelihood, and so they will make a decision that is a financially sound decision, a business decision. I would argue, however, that that decision needs to be a bit more enlightened. So most people will use something like a return on investment and think about their ROI. And I would say you can expand this and have a category of ROI on how much carbon you're going to cut. So you have multiple decisions, and there's calculators for that. So I would say it's good to do that financial decision, but you can add more component to it to actually make a good financial and environmental, etc. decision. So a lot of it is still very much the same. I mean, it's not like it's changed so much, and it depends a little bit on the ways. I mean, here in Europe, as you know, we've had over the last couple of years ups and down with the energy costs. So therefore, as soon as you have a crisis around energy, I mean, that's going to be a big motivator to say, I need to be energy efficient. The upside to this is, yeah, you are being energy efficient, you reduce the amount of energy, and thus you reduce also your overall impact on producing that energy in the first place. So it's great in that respect. It's great. I mean, I'm not saying that the whole crisis is a great
No,
thing,
no,
but
no. But I
yeah,
totally understand that the people, businesses and others are motivated more by kind of what's happening at the moment than by what's happening way down the road, although they're more enlightened than they used to be about what's happening way down the road.
yeah.
But to your point, something happens today and energy costs triple. These guys are all going to look to figure out how to reduce or make be much more efficient in their use of energy, as opposed to when there is no crisis, they may not be as forward thinking to say we should do this anyway.
And that's a problem, actually. And this short term approach, but it's not only this industry. I think it's generally speaking, a systemic problem of the system we have in place, of the fact that we are short term driven in a world that actually is asking for long term, right, decision. You cannot blame them. I mean, this is the system that we're in, and so therefore those decisions are often based on, it's often reactionary, which is what you've just mentioned. Something happens, therefore we do. So not so much ahead and thinking, oh, how do we build that resilience? I mean, we've talked so much. It's interesting, no, because we, out of COVID and during COVID, we were talking so much, and there are some good tools now that we have in place for trying to build every. But a lot of the resilience talk in hospitality has gone out the window. I mean, COVID is over. Things are the operations. We're very much now, on the operation side and trying to, get this season going, etc. And so we're back to the short term again. The question is, how much of that resilient talk, which means also planning for XYZ scenario, how much of that now is still in place for the next shock? I don't know. And I haven't done any research in that field, so I
No, but
can't I can't really
that's
tell.
interesting to think about. I was recently doing a podcast with Daniel Heward, who's one of our other fellows, and he's on the actual building. He's a lead fellow and an architect and an engineer, and he was telling me kind of what you're saying, that when there's going to be a new project to build a building or to retrofit fit a building, the thing that motivates those who are paying for it and those who are doing it is, are they going to get a return on it? Or is it going to be, if I invest $1 million in fixing my systems in my building so that they're more efficient, how am I going to get that back? And if you can show them that those investments come back tenfold or fivefold or whatever, it motivates. That's one motivator, as opposed to some of the people you mentioned who are just really believers and altruists who say, I want to build the most eco-friendly resort in the world and I want everything to work and I want it to be 100% regenerative so that at the end of the day, we are totally neutral to the environment. There's that group, but that's a small sliver. But
It
the
is.
rest of the people, you kind of have to hit them with the pocketbook.
Yeah, and I mean, there is one more layer, I guess, and this is without going into the macroeconomics, but I mean, there is one more layer to this, to say, because one of the barrier actually, so as much as the financials, the return on any decision, return on investment, etc., is a motivator, it's like catch 22, or it's like the chicken and egg, because one of the major barrier is, I have to bring out I have to bring out the money. I mean, if I want saving in energy, saying it is not going to make you save anything. You've got to invest in LEDs to be able to have the saving net. So it's a little bit the chicken and the egg. You've got to be able to invest to be able to have the savings. Now, one of the things that I think that we see more and more, because a lot of the talk is always, oh, are the consumers willing to pay for this, and what is willing to pay, and the idea is that sustainability costs more. And for the building is a good example. So we're looking at, sustainable building will cost you an investment probably 8 to 10% more than a normal building. So again, sustainability is costing more. Why is it costing more? That's the question. Why is it costing more?
Right.
When we know, so it's costing more because in fact we're at a disadvantage in sustainability, because we are planning, we are investing for something that's long term, that's going to have very low impact, while my neighbors are basically taking shortcut, right? Not doing the right thing, but the market is actually giving them a favor because it's not including all the repercussion and all the costs of externality. So he may use the worst, I don't know, concrete that you have and the worst, etc., whatever. And of course, it's cheaper. It's actually more expensive to everyone in carbon, in bio, you name it. It's costing
It's
us a
more
lot.
costly to humanity and to the planet.
Exactly. But while the guy next door is trying to do something sustainable, of course, he's thinking about all of this and, oh, maybe I can put some cross laminated timber and then I'll have hemp and then I'll do this and whatever. And it's, whatever. It's costing him a lot of time and a lot of resources, etc., to construct something which is actually good for all of us. And that's the downside. The market is not transparent. When it comes to this, really, the market, the pricing of all our goods and services is not transparent because it doesn't have that life cycle assessment impact in it. And the argument now, this is where tech, I think, is exciting because this tech, the tech AI and others, you could argue could provide that level of transparency to know the impact across the entire chain, which means when I choose a product, it's priced accordingly. And if it isn't sustainable, it is priced more expensive than the guy next door, which is sustainable.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Hopefully.
So I want to pivot into tech, and I know that you were recently at, what is it, the ITB,
ITB in Berlin, yeah.
and that is, I know from doing a little research because you were there and I looked at some of your sessions. That's like the biggest hospitality show in the world, right? Like
Because yeah,
100,000 seats.
it's tourism, so it's the entire tourism, lots of destinations, the entire and hospitality in there as well. But yeah, it's 100,000 visitors, 180 countries.
Crazy. I
They're
mean, that's great.
I think 3 halls of tech only. It's a big deal. Yeah.
Wow. Well, so I was looking at that. I was looking at the agenda. I was looking at a couple of the lectures, yours and a couple others, or keynotes. And I did notice that tech is like woven into everything now, AI and tech. Whereas, again, I haven't been there, I haven't done it, but I know you've been doing it for 20 years. I guarantee you 20 years ago, that was not a
That's
big
right.
focus. It may have
Yeah.
been a smaller focus. Tell me a little bit about how tech and AI have kind of become part of that industry like they have in the rest of the world, but how is it kind of having an impact now and in the future, do you think, on the hospitality industry?
Yeah, it's quite, I mean, these are exciting days in many ways, exciting and worrying at the same time. It's very dynamic. I mean, the hospitality and tourism sector are dynamic sectors. In any case, a lot of people say sometimes we're a bit behind as a sector to other sectors in regards to the implementation or acceptance of certain tech, but things have changed a lot and technology now is across everything. I mean, from revenue management to distribution, any process that you can think of in tourism and hospitality, you've got tech in the middle there somewhere. And so, so that's why you see so many panels, so much discussion on tech topics. I mean, it's across the board, and it doesn't matter if you do sustainability, HR, or any other topic, you'll have tech throughout all of this. And I think for me in sustainability, which is the part that that I'm responsible for at ITB convention, I think technology is quite interesting because in sustainability, it's both a catalyst, I think, for positive change, but it's also a challenge. I think it's a challenge because the amount of technology that is being created, it forces us to rethink a little bit our relationship as well with the natural world. You know what I mean? Like with our surrounding, with society, with our economies, because in sustainability there is this idea, is technology the silver bullet? I mean, is this what's going to fix the major planetary challenges, or is technology then just a set of tools that help on the incremental improvement path to more sustainability? Or there's even a third part, which is perhaps the most worrying, is technology blinding us to the need that, in fact, we do need the people to move along. I mean, we need behavior, we need managerial decision, we need that to support tech because tech itself is not going to do it.
Right.
So it raises, right, in sustainability, I think it's super interesting because it's got massive amount of potential. And that's why it's so popular on the stage, of course, anyone that discusses this. Yeah.
Well, interestingly, earlier on you mentioned you're out of the box idea of educating travelers and educating people on tourism. And I'm actually thinking we're working on a project right now. And one of the reasons why we know each other and why we're together is that at Spaceship, we're developing this human trained AI basically that will be different from, say, a chat GPT where you just plug stuff in and it searches the internet and gives you, and I'm simplifying this, everything that's there, to a very kind of tailored, bespoke uh, education that is fueled by experts like yourself and others, depending on the topic and the industry. And we're working on this project with a big travel company so that when people purchase a trip to, in this case, Bali, they're going to have access to some human trained AI that will help them before their trip to be able to have a more sustainable trip. So, and you're participating in that. It's still early days, but give me a little bit of your thoughts on that as kind of one of the things that kind of fills the gap of what your out of the box idea is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that project is particularly interesting for me. So if I think of technology, I mean, there's a lot of technology in hospitality which isn't AI. I mean, we cannot. I think a lot of it seems to go under the umbrella of AI these days. But we have technology which is basic technology that doesn't have any predictive qualities. You see what I mean? I've got motion sensors, but the motion sensors are only that they don't have a history, they don't analyze anything, they just simply go on and off.
Yeah, it's
Of
like it
course,
just tells you, okay, they went on at 3 o'clock, they went off at 4 o'clock. Well,
exactly.
it's like
But there
a
is
doc
but
that.
the next level, of course, is to say, well, those motion sensors are going to have the capability of analyzing the traffic, right, around the corridors, and then they can predict when to go on a. Then we add the AI component to it. So I think there seems to be a lot these days under the AI umbrella, which perhaps is not necessarily. No, there's a lot of traditional, what I would call non-AI technology out there. The AI is the interesting part because you elevate that traditional technology because you're saying it's smarter, it's interconnected, it's dynamic, etc. Now, what I find, so there's great application of AI. There's also some danger to it, but what I like, and I speak here as an educator, of course, what I like as an educator, and this links a little bit to the tool that's being developed here at the Spaceship, is the opportunity that AI can offer in providing that. And I use education, but I don't want people to think education in terms of traditional mode of education where there's a, sort of a transactional between a teacher and I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about sort of access to interesting knowledge and facts and trying to. So AI gives you this. I mean, it's a wonderful toolbox. You open and the world is yours if you want it to, and if you know how to interact with this thing. So so from that side, from the education, the access to knowledge, it's beautiful, and there's a lot that can be done for tourism, especially if it's well managed. We were just, I was just arguing about 20 minutes ago to say, well, maybe we need tourism course, like we need to have tourism across all faculties because we all have in common, we're going to be tourists at one point. Well, this is where this tool comes in, really, because that's basically this. It's basically saying, well, listen, you're going to go to destination XYZ, and what is there, and what's the sustainability aspect, and how can I interact with the local, and what are the cultural issues that can be doing, etc. I mean, there's so much that can be so good. In a way, you sort of think that perhaps in the old days, and I'm going back sort of pre-internet days, would be the day where perhaps our parents would be sitting at a travel agent and would try to get most out of this from a travel agent that's sitting in front of you. With a bit of luck, that travel agent has been to the destinations, and then they could be telling when you're there, you've got to take that
Do
cooking
this,
class
do
because
that,
it,
eat
right.
here. Yeah.
So then they would try to build this destination for. So now, of course, this is the beauty of this tech. So we have this amazing. We said we want to be sort of guardian and stewards of this planet. Well, every consumer, every traveler can play that role if it engages well with the destinations, and this is where AI can play a real role.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm thinking of it exactly as you mentioned. In the old days, you'd get a guidebook or you'd go to the travel agent and hope that they've been somewhere. And the best travel agents were the ones who've actually traveled a lot because, oh, I went to Hong Kong or I went here, I went there. And if they didn't, they would just look up however they did and say, oh, yeah, if you go to Paris, go to the Louvre, go to the Eiffel Tower. I mean, Doesn't take a rocket scientist to know those things, but it's the kind of the next level of your trip and personalizing it to what you want. So AI, if used in the right way and if trained the right way, if two or three different people are going to the same destination, they can engage with AI that's been trained by people like you and go on their own little journey, and it will make wonderful recommendations for them. And hopefully, in our case, and how they can be more sustainable, that will be unique to them. But
Yeah.
it'll make their journey more special, but it'll also steer them in the direction of how they can give back. And what I would get out of it would be a little different from what you would get out of it, would be different from like a young couple who's going on a trip versus a family, but they can use the same tool to leave a less of a footprint and be better tourists.
Yeah, and that's the beauty here between sort of this idea of human ingenuity in a way and artificial intelligence, because you're harmonizing those two to create that ecosystem where one supports the other, really. And that's the beauty, I think, of such a tool. And we often talk about the destinations where we have to move tourist flows. We've just said some destinations got too many tourists at once, but well, I mean, a tool like this could be guiding you to say, well, you want to go to a spot where there isn't that many people, this is where you have to go, and so on. You can move the
Yeah,
flow
yeah.
of there's so much you can
Even
do with this.
selecting where you're going to go. Like I know, what was it, in the last year, like Barcelona has had like a backlash against tourism because they were over, there are too many people going there. I mean, I don't know all the facts, but it sounds like that. So if there were a better tool, you could plug in and say, look, I want to go somewhere in Europe. And they might say, well, if it's February, these are the places where there won't be a lot of crowds, but those types of things to kind of manage traffic almost are
Yeah.
almost as important.
And the I think the end effect with this is this idea of having an authentic experience. I mean, people always, this is the big word, right? You want the authenticity. Well, I mean, if you go to a place where it's overcrowded and you have lots of tourist shops, etc., you don't get that. You get a made up experience for you, for the tourist. But of course, with the AI tool, I mean, this is where, in fact, and this is kind of interesting because technology often doesn't help you to have authentic experience. But in this case, it does, because it actually gives you the links towards, this is what you have to do. Go here, go and see this, go and interact with those people, go to that beach and not this one. And this is where you have a greater chance of having that authentic experience.
That's awesome. And you know what? We're bumping up on the time. This time has just flown here talking to you. I'm enjoying this immensely. We're going to do this again,
Okay.
and it's been great to have you here. I think the takeaways are, the hospitality industry is bigger than we all think. It's huge. It's got many facets. It touches the whole world, and it's a good place to focus on sustainability and regenerative tourism
Yeah,
and all the
and
things
that's
we talked
and that's
about.
the key word, Todd. Let's remember next time, because we haven't talked about that. Let's talk about regeneration. That's a whole box to open as well.
Well, I want to talk more about that with you, and we're going to do it. Totally thank you for your time this evening from Germany and here in LA, where the sun is finally out after a few days of rain. I'm on my way actually to Singapore, where I'm going to see some of our fellow Spaceship fellows, because we got a bunch of them there. I'm going to be there for the months of April sweating, but
Right?
I will
Yeah.
try to be a responsible tourist while I'm there, even though I've lived there before, so I'm not really a tourist. Willy, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Todd. Thanks very much.